Keanu Reeves never thought that a regular day in a bustling food court could become such a shock. What happened after a brief altercation with a conceited stranger turned everything upside down and made dozens of people reconsider their attitudes toward one another. An unexpected confrontation revealed the true character of Keanu, and no one could have predicted where it would lead. Friends, before we continue this story, I ask you to support it. If you enjoy this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and definitely share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement really helps our small community grow. Now let's dive into the events that took place on that day. Keanu had come here, hoping to have a quiet meal and take a break from the noise of big cities. Despite his worldwide fame, he always tried to remain one of the people. A sporty backpack on his shoulders, a simple black t-shirt, and dark jeans, nothing gave away his celebrity status except for the friendly smile he offered everyone around him. That day, the food court was especially busy, families with children excitedly choosing their meals, tired workers grabbing takeout coffee, and students chatting about their projects. Keanu took a seat by one of the panoramic windows to enjoy the view outside. He was talking with a tray runner who cheerfully spoke about his weekend plans. In return, Keanu asked how his job was going and if he was satisfied with his schedule. It was an ordinary, innocent conversation between two strangers, one a global superstar who hates drawing attention to himself, and the other an everyday employee of the mall. No one expected what was about to unfold. From across the hall came increasingly loud complaints and irate comments. The atmosphere changed, as if the air itself grew thick with tension. At first, people glanced around, puzzled. Then the curious among them began drifting closer to see the source of the commotion. Keanu instinctively looked up from his plate. He noticed that the tray runner, just moments ago so cheerful, had turned pale and stepped back. In the center of everyone's attention stood a man named Arthur, a confident, loud-voiced customer who was practically boring holes into another young man with his stare. That young man looked extremely embarrassed, his slender build and timid movements betrayed his vulnerability. "Yeah, what could you possibly know about life?" Arthur shouted. "Looking so pitiful, all you ever do is pretend you're miserable." Watching these outbursts, Keanu felt that familiar burning in his chest. He had seen scenarios like this many times, someone more powerful, physically or socially, using humiliation to assert themselves. And it was taking place just a few steps away from him. "Hey, man," an elderly gentleman nearby tried to intervene softly, but Arthur waved him off in irritation. "Don't butt in. Who do you think you are?" For a moment, there was silence. All eyes were on Arthur, who stood there like a peacock showing off its feathers. Then he turned back to the young man he was harassing and sneered, "You should be grateful I bothered talking to you in the first place." Keanu realized it was time to stand up and step in. But as he weighed how best to do that, a memory from his past flashed in his mind. Back when he was a teenager, he had witnessed a similar injustice in a small cafe. At the time, he was too confused to stand up for the victim. Today, he wasn't going to repeat that mistake. "Excuse me," Keanu said, stepping forward and addressing Arthur. "It seems there's a problem here. Maybe we can figure this out without all the yelling." Arthur whipped around sharply. "And who are you to tell me what to do? Think you're smarter than everybody else?" The young man Arthur was insulting shrank back and lowered his eyes. He looked terribly uncomfortable, clearly not used to such attention, let alone open aggression. Most of those around them stood frozen in silence, as though afraid to make any sudden moves. It seemed they all viewed this as nothing more than an argument between two strangers and did not want to get involved. "I'm not trying to teach you anything," Keanu replied calmly, keeping his voice even. "It's just that anyone can have a bad day, but you don't have to take it out on other people." Arthur narrowed his eyes and took a step forward, as if to force the new challenger to retreat. He clearly wasn't used to anyone disagreeing with him, especially with such composure. "A bad day?" he scoffed. "That pathetic guy," he jerked his head toward the young man he'd been insulting, only knows how to whine and act miserable." Arthur's words were like poison. But Keanu stood his ground, feeling responsible for the situation now. Especially after seeing how the pathetic guy was trembling in fear and embarrassment. It echoed Keanu's own youth, stirring a vow in his mind: help him. Suddenly, a girl, perhaps a friend, ran over to the young man. She tried to pull him away from Arthur, but couldn't, as the aggressor stood blocking the narrow path between tables. The girl looked around for help. But most people either looked away or pretended they noticed nothing. Such is human nature, everyone's afraid of becoming the next target. "Look," Keanu said politely but firmly. "We can discuss this calmly. No one here wants a fight." Arthur smirked, giving Keanu a slow once-over, probably concluding from his simple clothes that he was just an ordinary nobody. The sneer on Arthur's face became more pronounced. "Oh, another peacemaker. You do better minding your own business, buddy," he said, raising his brows. "This conversation doesn't concern you." But Keanu knew, if he turned a blind eye now, he'd leave this poor young man alone with a venomous bully. He took a deep breath, aware the conversation ahead wasn't going to be easy. "I'm sure there's a better way to solve this," Keanu said, resolutely but without aggression. "I understand people lose their temper sometimes, but there's no need to take it out on others." Arthur snickered. "You some sort of lawyer for this guy? Look at him, trembling, can't even speak properly. Let him learn to stand up for himself if he doesn't like it." The insulted young man flinched and mumbled, I just asked if they serve a meat-free dish." The girl who seemed to be his friend swallowed hard. She explained that he was a vegetarian and that the entire scene started over a small misunderstanding in line. Arthur, it seemed, didn't bother to curb his humiliating jokes and was ridiculing the young man for being too picky. The issue escalated into this nasty argument, and now it was becoming genuinely frightening. Keanu strove to remain composed, but felt a wave of outrage rising inside him. He wanted not just to calm Arthur but to show how wrong it is to harass someone for their personal choices, or for not meeting someone else's standards. In that moment, a sudden flash of memory reminded him how, long ago, people had jeered at him for his family's background and income. "I won't let this injustice repeat itself," he resolved silently. "Listen," Keanu continued, his voice now colored by unwavering conviction. "You're yelling at someone who merely wants a meal that fits his preference. Why all the insults? Don't you have anything more important in life?" Arthur gave a short laugh and glanced around at the crowd. "You hear that? I'm doing everything right. Let him learn to protect himself if he's so sensitive." A brief hush fell over the food court as people witnessed this exchange. More and more customers began sympathizing with the young man, though they still hesitated to step forward. Perhaps they worried about becoming the next victim. Yet the tension was palpable. "Hey, come on," another voice from the crowd finally said. Arthur looked around, trying to pinpoint who dared speak, but the speaker was lost among onlookers, making it impossible to identify them. "You're all spineless," Arthur muttered, though his eyes flickered with mild confusion. "None of you have the guts to challenge me." Keanu could feel growing frustration. How could an adult behave like this? But he stayed calm. "No one's scared of you. We just don't see the point in this humiliating charade. I'd like us all to go back to our meals without more screaming." The vegetarian young man, still wiping sweat from his brow, whispered, "Sorry. I never wanted a fight." Arthur, however, refused to stand down. "You calling yourself a victim? Are you always whining about how tough life is?" He stepped forward again, as if about to renew his attack. This time, Keanu quickly positioned himself in between them, staring Arthur straight in the eye. By now, many in the crowd sensed that the quiet man confronting the aggressor wasn't just any random bystander. There was something in his calm gaze and gentle voice that showed inner strength. "Let him go," Keanu said. "He doesn't need your advice or your insults. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder, and people whispered among themselves. Many were astonished at how this humbly dressed man firmly stood up to someone clearly bigger and louder. Even so, Keanu rarely thought about his fitness or martial arts skills learned for various film roles. What mattered now was stopping negativity from spreading, nipping it in the bud. "All of you think you're brave because there are so many of you," Arthur suddenly shouted. "You think you can gang up on me?" While Arthur yelled, the vegetarian's friend took advantage of the distraction and guided him away. They were about to leave the food court, but something in the young man's eyes conveyed guilt, as if he felt responsible for starting the commotion. A woman clutching a paper cup murmured quietly, "Why'd he start this in the first place? He could have just ignored the guy. I bet he's got a superiority complex," another onlooker whispered. Though more people sympathized with the victim, the tension had not fully broken. Arthur remained, arms crossed, glaring defiantly. He wanted everyone to know he was willing to teach a lesson to anyone daring to speak up. "Maybe that's enough," someone called out loudly. Arthur looked around, trying to locate the speaker, but it was impossible to tell who had shouted. He sneered. "You're all weak. None of you can stand up to me." Keanu sensed the growing confusion. How could someone be so brazen? Still, he spoke in the same measured tone. "No one is frightened. We just see no point in your bullying. I'd like us all to continue our lunch without further arguments." The vegetarian boy, still trembling, mumbled an apology. But Arthur cut in with renewed insults. People all around were torn between shock and the urge to confront him. Then they seemed to look to Keanu for guidance, noticing how calmly he stood. Arthur continued yelling demeaning remarks at the couple heading toward the exit. This time, a food court employee, the same one who had chatted with Keanu earlier, found a bit of courage and stepped up. "Excuse me, sir, but maybe you could calm down. People are here to relax and eat." Arthur just gave an irritated shake of his head and was about to unleash another verbal tirade. Then his gaze fell on Keanu's face. In that moment, as Keanu turned slightly, trying to show non-aggression with a hand gesture, Arthur seemed to notice a faint familiarity. He squinted in doubt and laughed awkwardly. "Hold on. You look familiar. Have I seen you somewhere?" A hush fell over the room, so intense you could have heard a plastic cup drop. Keanu realized this could be the moment of truth. If Arthur recognized him, everything might escalate or abruptly change in tone. "Come on," Keanu tried to deflect. "Let's talk about why you're insulting people instead." Arthur refused to let it go. "No, wait, I've seen your face somewhere." A stifled giggle came from a teenager in the crowd, someone who had likely recognized Keanu but was afraid to shout it out. Keanu braced himself, aware that any second now, his disguise as an ordinary patron could crumble. Sensing the crowd's rising interest, Arthur decided it was time to flaunt himself again. He extended his hand in a mocking invitation. "So, buddy? Maybe you want to tell me where I know you from? Or are you just pretending to be someone important?" Keanu took a deep breath, realizing that if Arthur connected the dots and discovered he was a world-famous actor, his reaction could be even more unpredictable. He looked Arthur in the eye and responded. "I'd be happy to meet under different circumstances, but right now I'd rather not talk about who I am. I just want you to apologize to that young man and stop harassing people." Arthur's lip curled with contempt. "Oh, so you're some big star. Think we should all bow down to you? Well, I don't care who you are. Nobody's gonna tell me what to do." Keanu sensed the situation heating up. Arthur wasn't just insulting people, he was determined to push this to the brink, just to save face. The pause in conversation stretched out, broken only by a voice yelling, "That's Keanu Reeves." Possibly someone who couldn't contain themselves any longer upon realizing the legendary actor's identity. People murmured in astonishment, and Arthur froze briefly. A flicker of shock and shame crossed his face, remembering how rudely he'd been talking to one of the most beloved actors in the world. Keanu Reeves? Arthur repeated in disbelief. Keanu nodded. Yes, that's me. But let's focus on what you're doing. Gasps of recognition, hushed excitement. Some in the crowd pulled out their phones to record, while most watched in stunned silence. Arthur, feeling so many eyes on him, realized the ground was shifting beneath him. Moments ago, he had been the king of the situation, intimidating everyone. Now he had to confront a world-famous star, and the star was calmly opposing him, refusing to use fame to dominate. So you're the real Keanu? Arthur finally managed. And what? Am I supposed to kneel or something? He tried to sound amused, but the shaky undertone gave him away. Meanwhile, the crowd stood in waiting, anticipating the final showdown. Keanu offered a faint smile, sensing Arthur's bravado waver. I'm not asking you to kneel or worship me, Keanu said levelly. I just want you to show people some respect. No one deserves to be humiliated. Maybe you could apologize to that young man and ask yourself why you acted this way. Arthur's face reddened. The crowd's expressions said they'd already judged him, and it wasn't good. People who once feared him now watched disapprovingly. Some recalled times they'd personally been bullied. The shared resentment in the room was palpable. Keanu remained where he was, not making any sudden moves. He saw that Arthur was close to cracking under the weight of everyone's disapproval. For a moment, Keanu wondered, what if I were in his shoes? Have I made mistakes like this before? But no recollection of such blatant cruelty came to mind. Even now, he felt some compassion for Arthur, recognizing that he was trapped in his own ego. See? Keanu added softly. No one here supports rudeness. You can do the right thing, just admit you were wrong and make peace. Nobody wants this fight to go on. Arthur's eyes darted left and right. His pride wouldn't let him just back down, but the crowd wasn't scared anymore. He could either keep shouting, digging a deeper hole, or do something to end this fiasco. The tension grew so thick you could almost feel it. Finally, a timid woman from the tray counter stepped up to Keanu, voice trembling, Mr. Reeves, can we do anything to stop this argument? Keanu gave her a warm smile, honestly, it's up to us. We can stay quiet or speak out. Right now, we choose to speak. There were a few seconds of silence until someone else's voice chimed in. He has to realize what he did was wrong. Otherwise, bullies always walk away without consequences. Arthur bristled at the shame rising within him. The crowd's moral verdict had become clear, and his tyranny no longer commanded fear but disdain. Some people remembered times they, too, were harassed or degraded. Like a sudden wave, solidarity overcame the crowd, uniting them against intimidation. Keanu took a small step aside, giving Arthur room to leave the ring of onlookers. With a slight gesture, he indicated he bore no personal grudge. In the end, it's your choice, whether you keep this going or stop now, Keanu said to Arthur. No one wants you to grovel. Just be human. Arthur clenched his jaw, realizing the entire crowd was watching, silently condemning. He cast a glance at the young vegetarian man and the girl, still at the exit, about to leave for good. Arthur hesitated, a brief flicker of conscience stirring as he realized it might be best to end this now before he lost all dignity. With a heavy sigh, he muttered, all right. I admit I got carried away. Keanu nodded. The food court staffers, relieved, began to smile. It felt like time slowed, and everyone waited for Arthur's next words. They wanted an apology, but he seemed unable to say it out loud. Well, a woman in the crowd prompted, don't you have something to say to that young man? Arthur shrugged uncertainly and mumbled under his breath, fine. I'm sorry. Hardly audible, but enough for those around him. It was a sign of some regret, at least. The crowd recognized that he'd stepped down, though not exactly graciously. A hush fell, as if people weren't quite sure how to respond. Then the tension started to melt away. Observing the couple near the entrance, Keanu walked over to them. He spoke gently to the anxious young man, "It's not your fault. Don't let anyone like that ruin your day." The young man, still shaken, returned Keanu's gaze in gratitude. His friend whispered, "Thank you so much," and they hurried out. Arthur stood alone now, aware of the stares. He turned to Keanu, trying to explain himself with phrases like, "It just happened," or "I didn't mean it," but Keanu showed no sign of resentment. "I just feel like everyone provokes me," Arthur sighed. Keanu shook his head. "From where I stood, it looked more like you were hurting them. Anger won't solve your problems. Sometimes kindness and composure are stronger than any shout." Arthur swallowed, realizing his pride had led him astray. People were leaving in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Some still glanced back, curious to see whether Arthur would lash out again. But he seemed deflated. "You know," one person in the crowd said, "he should find that guy and really apologize to his face." Keanu nodded. "If you want people to believe you're truly sorry, find him and say it properly. Say, 'I'm sorry,' so it's clear that you mean it." Arthur grimaced but recognized the crowd's expectations. He turned toward the exit. No one cheered or clapped, relief had taken the place of tension. A new energy, community rather than fear, spread through the large hall. Keanu took a deep breath, looking around. Many gazes were filled with gratitude. Employees seemed more relaxed now, returning to their duties, clearing scattered napkins, taking orders. The hum of conversation returned, like a room exhaling after a long, held breath. "Thank you for stepping in," said a young worker in the food court uniform, the same one who had recognized Keanu. "Not everyone would defend a stranger like that. You're a real hero." "I'm just a person," Keanu replied, shaking the worker's hand. "I don't need a pedestal. What's important is not looking away when someone's being hurt." The worker beamed. He nervously asked, "I've heard you often help people quietly. Is that true?" Keanu shrugged gently. "I try not to broadcast my actions, but I can't stand by in moments like these." The employee nodded, eyes glowing with admiration. Nearby, others gathered, wanting to express their thanks. Keanu gestured that he had one last thing to handle first. He approached the few bystanders who remained worried after the conflict. One of them was the shy girl who'd earlier asked how to stop the fight. She still looked shaken. "Don't be afraid, it's over," Keanu reassured her. "If you ever meet people like that again, remember it's their own problem, not yours." She gave a small, relieved smile and whispered her thanks. This moment showed everyone present that a famous actor could have not just talent but a genuinely big heart. Keanu hadn't demanded special treatment, hadn't filmed the encounter for publicity, nor used his celebrity status to overshadow others. He had simply done the right thing. Little by little, people in the area found the courage to approach him. Some offered handshakes, others said a quick, "Thank you." The warmth of gratitude spread, truly uplifting everyone's spirits. Those who had been hesitant before realized that any small act of kindness can change the world. Today, that act came from Keanu. Tomorrow, one of them might be the one to protect someone else from injustice, without fear. A middle-aged man with a half-eaten burger on his tray walked over. "Sorry we didn't step in sooner. Nobody wanted to deal with that bully, but thanks for doing what you did." "I get it," Keanu said with understanding. "It's not always easy to be the first to speak up. But your voice matters. Just remember that." A woman standing nearby softly agreed, "Yes, if only someone had said, 'Enough,' right away, maybe none of this would have happened. I regret that we stayed silent." Keanu smiled gently, "We all learn every day. And if today taught us something, then none of it was in vain." Food court employees offered Keanu and others free drinks or discounts as an apology, but he politely declined, saying there was no need to treat him as a special guest. Instead, he invited the tray runner to sit for a moment and talk. "So, what do you think?" Keanu asked him. "Why do people so often fear getting involved in conflicts?" "Probably because they don't want trouble," the employee replied with a shrug. "Maybe the bully has a weapon, or might strike back. Nobody wants to get hurt." Keanu sighed. "True. But maybe we can at least call security or calmly ask them to stop shouting." The employee smiled. "After watching you, maybe next time I'll be able to do just that. You showed me how to act without aggression." "Thank you." Keanu simply returned the smile. He was glad people were beginning to see a simple truth: everyone is capable of making the world a bit better, even if only through a small but brave gesture. A few minutes later, the teenager who recognized him earlier finally gathered the courage to approach Keanu again, awkwardly asking if they could take a photo. Glancing around and noticing everything had calmed down, Keanu nodded. "Sure, let's do a quick picture, no flashes or big fuss, okay?" The kid was overjoyed. After snapping the photo, he thanked Keanu and declared he now had further proof that his idol truly cared about people. Off in the corner, someone murmured, "Where'd that bully go? Did he leave?" Keanu heard and turned to see that indeed, Arthur was nowhere in sight. Likely he had slipped away to avoid more embarrassment or to track down the pair he had tormented. Nobody faulted him for leaving, everyone else was lost in their own thoughts. Slowly, the clamor and liveliness returned to normal. People resumed eating and chatting. Some still discussed what had happened, while others happily enjoyed their meals, glad the drama had ended well. Keanu finally finished his now cold tea, took a few sips, and smiled to himself. If even one person realized today that goodness really can triumph over cruelty, then this day wasn't wasted, he thought. In conclusion, he wanted to address anyone who might see or hear this story. Friends, small acts of kindness can transform our world more powerfully than we realize. Don't be afraid to defend those who need it. Speak up when you witness injustice. Believe me, each of us can be the one who breaks the cycle of someone's pain and sets an example for others. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Feel free to share your own stories in the comments, talk about a time you helped someone or when someone helped you. And remember, be kind, because you never know how important that may be for someone else. With these words, Keanu packed up. Waving goodbye to the onlookers still curious about him, he headed toward the exit. He felt pleasantly tired but also content, knowing he hadn't remained indifferent. Maybe such moments are what make us truly human, when we refuse to turn away from someone in need of protection or a supportive word. And though this short episode may not instantly change the entire world, it definitely reminded everyone that kindness requires no fanfare or special titles, it comes from the heart of each and every one of us.